wading today into Mac malware analysis. Hi, I'm Ken Ray, welcoming you in episode 196 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I have never written a book. Have you? Friend of the show, Patrick Wardle, is writing one right now. Not only can you read along as he goes, you might be able to help out too. Stick around and find out more on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. You know what's great? When people who know a lot try to help other people know a little bit more. Patrick Wardle once worked for the NSA. He's currently an Apple security researcher for the enterprise device management firm Jamf. On his own, he runs a Mac security website called Objective-C.com. That's Objective-SEE, Objective-C.com. Now, busy as all of that makes him, he is also writing a book. I got to catch up with him a few days ago and ask about that. So the book is called The Art of Mac Malware Analysis. That does, of course, sum up what the book is about, but I'm wondering if you could say a tiny bit more about what you're doing with the book.
Yeah, so the idea was basically if you have a file, a binary, an application, a package that you think might be malicious, it really is kind of a detailed walkthrough of how you would go about analyzing that to answer questions such as, is it malicious? Is it benign? And if it is malicious, kind of dig more into, how does it function? How does it persist? What is it trying to do once it gets on your computer? So, this is something I spend a lot of my day job doing, analyzing new threats, new viruses targeting Mac OS. So the goal was really to capture my process, steps one would generally do in order to answer these questions in a very informative and hopefully hands-on manner that can kind of teach some of these ideas as well.
So who's it for then? I mean, are we talking about like the average reader? Are we talking about folks who already work in security who might be looking for a refresher or some pointers? Is this for people who might be interested in eventually doing the kind of thing you're doing? I mean, who's your target audience here?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ken, because I would say the book is definitely intermediary to advanced. It does start with some introductions to Mac malware, gives some good overviews, a good primer, but then pretty quickly dives into more intermediate and advanced topics just because, by its nature, computer virology, analyzing computer viruses is somewhat of an advanced topic. So I would say the average, audience, target reader, maybe someone who has experience in information security, who might want to get deeper into understanding how to analyze malware targeting specifically Mac OS, or even someone who is very familiar analyzing malware on another platform, for example, Windows, and has a good understanding on foundational concepts, but is kind of new to the platform or hasn't had a lot of experience analyzing malware targeting Mac OS, Apple systems.
Now, there is some stuff that I've been doing this show for close to 4 years now. So I was going to say there's some stuff that's accessible to the, average person, but I would say that that's still true. And we'll get to that in a bit. One of the things, though, that I found most interesting is your call to the community. As you move through the chapters, there's this note that is repeated. This book is a work in progress. You're encouraged to directly comment on these pages, suggesting edits, corrections, and or additional content. Then there are instructions on actually how to, comment or suggest those edits. I'm curious, what made you decide to go that route?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about involving the community in a lot of areas, a lot of the work I do. I mean, if you look at Objective-C, which is the website I created, that has free Mac security tools, open source blog. All the content there is free. And again, the goal is really to engage people as well. The Objective by the C conference we organized, basically free to attend. So again, really like the idea of engaging the community and involving the community, especially in the topics of security. So the idea for this book was really to take that kind of to the next level and provide a mechanism for the interested reader to provide feedback. And really, for me, I thought that this was a clear win-win. And I'll talk about why selfishly, that benefits me as a book author. More eyes on it, right? I get insight if I've perhaps misspelled something or there's some grammar issues. So it's kind of like crowdsourced community editing, which is very helpful to me. But then more importantly, it also really allows me to get feedback as I am creating this book. So if something is perhaps unclear, maybe I don't describe or explain something in a way that's as digestible as I could, or perhaps I've, overlooked a certain section or some content that should be included, the readers can actually suggest that. So the end result will be a book that's more comprehensive, digestible, and has fewer grammar and editing issues.
Right.
So as an author, those are all very, very appealing to me. It's interesting because books, especially once you go print them, are kind of static. And a lot of times that's the first time the user sees the book is when they pick it up. And whereas I thought, look, if I can get feedback kind of during this whole process, that will make the end product a lot better. Plus, engaging the community in general, I think is a really interesting approach because people are also going to feel like they're part of something, which was really the goal. I really want this to be a comprehensive resource that can help educate or teach other people who are interested in that. And it would be naive and maybe even arrogant for me to assume that, I'm the best or I have all the answers in creating such a book. So again, kind of opening it up to the community, we can really bring in the best of all worlds and really collaborate and bring all these good ideas into one individual resource, which will hopefully then be the best resource because of all that community involvement.
It's funny because you and I haven't talked about this before, but you just hit on so many different points that I was thinking about, starting with, it's going to be your name on the book. I've talked to you a few times. Enough, I think, to know that, your name is not going to be the biggest print on the book necessarily. At the same time, you could see some people saying, well, no, I'm writing this book, so I'll tell you. And I think it's great that you're involving the community. I will also say, I don't know about this book because you told me or because, Nicholas Raba or Nicholas Tachek or anybody else told me. I know about this book because I follow you on Twitter. And when you started writing the book as a collaborative effort with the community was adding you all over the place on Twitter saying, I'm very excited to see where this goes. I'm very excited to be able to, read along as it happens. And I'm assuming it's those are the kinds of people that are going to be commenting as well. Now, I gotta say really quickly, with it being a work in progress, with the community having eyes on the book, is there anything that anybody's added so far that surprised you or taught you anything you didn't know, or are we too early in the process for those kind of surprises to have popped up?
I wouldn't say there has been anything super unusual or surprises per se, but I've had some really good feedback, especially in putting out maybe new areas that I should cover more. One example was there's a section on the infection vector chapter, which basically describes how Macs are infected, how viruses actually break in or target these systems. And I had a section about attackers using zero-day exploits, which are exploits where no patch exists. And it's a very powerful technique, but I kind of overlooked the fact that even once an exploit has been patched, there are still going to be some number of users who don't apply the patch and therefore are still vulnerable. And so even if the vulnerability is no longer a zero-day, malware can and has still attempted to target unpatched users. And I believe it was Thomas Reed who kind of made that point. He's a very well-known Mac malware analyst, works for Malwarebytes. So he kind of said, hey, Patrick, you should, expand this section a little bit to also cover exploits that have been patched. And so that was really good feedback because we've actually seen instances where malware is using patched vulnerabilities to target users who have not yet patched. So that was kind of a great example where I was able to expand a section, add more content based on the feedback from, in this case, Thomas, who is a colleague, someone I really respect. So it's really neat to get that kind of input from the community. And also, as you mentioned, again, engaging the community and having when I tweet about it, having them retweet and share. That also provides a lot of really positive exposure to the book, which again brings more eyes, more input, more feedback. So it's, again, this really cumulatively community-driven effect, which I think is really just a win-win-win for everybody.
Well, you started to mention a section in the last segment that I wanted to dive into in this segment. And it's sort of the primer. It's the part that I think is accessible, honestly, probably to everybody. I mean, as I said last segment, I've been doing this show for about 4 years now, so I know a lot more than I used to. Enough that when I read some of the terms that you're throwing around in this one segment, I'm sort of familiar, and yet I still find it informative too. And I think if anybody walks away from this going, I don't know that whole book is for me, I can almost guarantee you, if you're subscribed to the checklist, at the very least, this segment is for you. Now, I'll be completely honest, I've not read everything you've written so far, which could be part of the reason that the book kind of leaves me after the section on capabilities. That said, I do love the sections that we're talking about now because they are, a good sort of basics on malware. The 3 sections in particular, you mentioned one last segment, infection vectors. Then there's persistence, and then there are capabilities, finally, of the Mac malware. I'd like to visit the first one and the third one, if we could, starting with infection vectors. What are they, and can you explain how they work? Or what are the ones you've listed so far in the book, and can you explain how they work?
Yeah, definitely. And that was kind of the idea, to start the book and really establish some foundational concepts, provide as you mentioned, Ken, a good primer on malware basics. Because as we kind of really then get into the more advanced sections of the book, which, as you mentioned, might have left you a little behind, which is totally understandable. I mean, these are like kind of very complex, very niche skills. So, don't beat yourself too much. Sometimes I go back and reread them. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, right? But the intro, I think, is really, really, really good and gets kind of some good concepts out there. So let's start with infection vectors. So this is the term I use to describe the mechanisms that malware or malware authors use or attempt to use in order to penetrate or gain access to a Mac system or any system. So this is basically answers the question, how does the malware, the viruses, how does it get onto the end system? How does it infect the Mac? So there's a whole myriad of ways that malware leverages, abuses, but some of them include fake updates. And I'm sure we've all at some point seen this. You browse to a website, there's a pop-up, and it says, hey, your Flash player is out of date. And this is more than likely a piece of adware or some other malware that's trying to infect your system. Now, the pop-up really isn't doing anything malicious per se, other than being an annoyance. But if you click on OK, download and run the quote-quote Flash update, more than likely you've just infected yourself. So this isn't really that sophisticated of an infection vector, right? It basically requires the user to infect themselves. It's basically downloading and running the malware. But it is fairly common and has been abused widely. Fake applications is another technique. This one's a little more sophisticated, but you might get a link or you might be browsing and you come across a new chat application or a new video app or some new cool application that you might want to try out. And this could either be completely fake, right? It might be claiming, for example, to be the desktop version of WhatsApp. We saw some malware leveraging that. Or it could be actually a Trojanized application, which could be something legitimate, but that has been injected with some malicious code. So again, if you are tricked into downloading and running these things, you are likely going to be infected. And then the last one is just pirated applications. A lot of times users like free software or don't like to pay. And ethical reasons aside, from a security point of view, this is really not a good idea because what hackers will often do is crack the licensing mechanism for something like Photoshop, a very expensive but common popular application. and then also inject some malware into that. So yes, you will get your free copy of Photoshop, but unfortunately there will be something built in as well. Now, the good thing from the user's point of view is, at least in Catalina, Apple has introduced something called notarization, which basically means that Apple will scan and check software before it's allowed to run on the operating system on Mac OS. So, if a malware author has created a fake Flash updater, obviously this is not going to be notarized and approved by Apple. So even if the user tries to go and run that, now Mac OS will block that. So what we're seeing, though, is we're seeing attackers move to more sophisticated infection vectors as Apple raises the bar. So two examples are macro-based attacks, where they're using malicious Office documents, and another one is just using exploits. So we see browser vulnerabilities, browser exploits, where advanced or more sophisticated adversaries can infect Mac systems if a user simply browses to a web page using a vulnerable browser. So that's kind of the main infection vectors in a nutshell.
Right. Now, I'm guessing that the easiest of those to avoid is the pirated software. I mean, like you said, if you're getting a free copy of Photoshop, and no, you're not, or at least you're not getting it legitimately. Exactly. I mean, you kind of know what you're doing, and I'm not saying you deserve what you get, but I mean, you at the very least need to be aware of the risks that you're running, and also, I mean, then there's the whole moral thing as well. I'm curious, though, of the remaining three, the fake updates, the fake applications, Trojanized applications, I think you also listed. In the book, you listed that separately. I'm guessing it's the fake updates that catch people out the most. Is that correct? Yeah, that's probably the most common. We've seen adware leverage that a lot. And, the attackers, the malware authors have done a really good job making these look very legitimate. So, you really can't fault the user that much, right? The security community has told them always install updates, which is valid. We should caveat only install legitimate updates. Right. So, a lot of users now know that. And, a lot of these websites might be containing, audio or video content, movies, video clips, et cetera, et cetera. And they might say, oh, this content will only run if you install your update. So again, the users apparently seem to believe they have reason to go ahead and do that. And unfortunately, that's then when they come infected. So that's probably the most common. The Trojanized applications are interesting too, because we see those being used often in supply chain attacks, where an adversary will actually infect a legitimate third-party website and then either Trojanize or infect the legitimate applications that are being distributed from that site. And then if the users come to that legitimate, albeit now hacked website, download and run the Trojan application, they will become infected. So that's not very common, but when it does happen, it's largely very effective because users really aren't doing anything wrong, right? They're browsing to a legitimate website, downloading what they believe is legitimate software. They're really not participating in any shady or suspicious activity, but then unfortunately still become infected. But again, with Apple's notarization, hopefully we'll see a lot of these infection vectors that were very successful really kind of fall to the side. And that's exactly why Apple has introduced this concept of notarization. I want to skip down to the malware capabilities really quickly. This is the one where you take a look at a lot of common capabilities of Mac malware, including survey and reconnaissance, adware-related hijacks and injections, cryptocurrency mining, remote shells, remote execution, remote download and upload, and file encryption. I want to concentrate on two because, again, in the time that I've been on the checklist, I've become familiar with a lot of those terms. And so I'm assuming that a lot of listeners have become familiar with those terms as well. There were two, though, that I didn't recognize. Can you tell me a bit more about surveying and reconnaissance malware? And then can you tell me about remote shells?
Yeah, those are actually two very interesting capabilities. So as you mentioned, the chapter really focuses on kind of the capabilities, the goals of the malware, right? So once it's penetrated the system, what does it do? And this is going to be generally specific or kind of tied to what type of malware it is. But something like surveying and reconnaissance is actually very common in the majority of all Mac malware. And the idea is one of the first things malware does when it gets on the system that kind of surveys the environment. Basically, imagine you just landed on the moon. You want to like look around and, check out the oxygen level and, make sure there's no monsters or, no other aliens. And so malware, kind of when it lands on your system, it really doesn't know where it's at. So it's got to do similar checks. It's got to say, am I compatible with this system? Is there a firewall or an antivirus product running that might detect me if I perform certain actions that it's looking for? And then also just gathering up information about the user, the version of the Mac OS. And so there's two main goals for this. The first is to uniquely identify the target. Imagine a piece of malware has infected a ton of Macs. Usually what malware will do is beacon back to a command and control server for more tasking. So if, thousands of Macs are connecting back, they have to have a way to uniquely identify themselves. So that's often done during the survey phase where they will, for example, get the username, but, oftentimes that's not enough, right? There's more than one person named Ken in the world. So they'll often get the serial number or the MAC address, other unique identifying information about the operating system and the system they're running. Then they'll send that back to the attacker's command and control server so that she or he can uniquely identify his or her targets. As I mentioned, then the other piece is examining the environment for incompatibility. So we've seen malware that will actually not infect a system if they see a firewall product running, because the malware knows when it tries to beacon out, that firewall will detect that unauthorized network account and alert the user, which in turn can bring attention to the malware. So the malware authors very interestingly said, hey, if we see a system that's running this firewall product, we're just not going to infect the system. That user, is good, right? We're just going to ignore them. But we'd rather do that, lose one or two infections versus our malware getting uncovered and then perhaps compromising the entire attack. So that's, again, why the malware often surveys the system as the first action of once it's infected the system. The other question you asked about was remote shells. This we see in more advanced malware. And so what a remote shell is, it allows a remote attacker the ability to run shell commands on an infected system. That's why we refer to them as remote shell. So the shell is basically, the terminal, the command prompt where you run commands. And if you're kind of like a Mac power user, you probably use the terminal to, maybe list files, search for things, look at a process list, kick off other applications. It's really like a console where you can interface directly with the computer. So what more sophisticated malware will do is it will expose the same functionality but remotely, which allows a remote attacker complete access over a infected system. It's basically like the attacker is now sitting directly in front of that infected system and can run any command. So this is generally interactive, which means it's not going to scale to thousands of computers. But to more advanced or more targeted infections and attacks, remote shells really give sophisticated adversaries, sophisticated attackers can complete an interactive control over an infected system, which is often exactly what they're going for.
More with Patrick Wardle in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. Chances are you're doing more with your computer today than you were just a few months ago, thanks to all this staying at home and learning from home and working from home. And did I mention the staying at home? You're not doing anything risky with your computer necessarily. I will say, though, now would be a terrible time for anything bad to happen to it, because you're relying on it so much more. You need a good anti-malware solution. One like MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by SecureMac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for over 20 years. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. Then once you decide to buy for less. You can take a little off your subscription to MacScan 3 with the offer code CHECKLIST. Try it out first. Let it clean out whatever you've gotten into. Then when you're ready to buy for less with offer code CHECKLIST at securemac.com/MacScan. Patrick Wardle is our guest today, author of the book, The Art of Mac Malware Analysis. Okay, so let's get back to the book specifically. As we've said, it's a work in progress. I'm curious, do you have any idea, and I'm not trying to rush you, do you have any idea, do you have like a target date, an end date? Do you have any idea when you think you're going to be done?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually the content for the book is essentially fully done. I started earlier this year. It was kind of my quarantine project where I committed to working, creating 500 words a day. And so by the time I actually announced the book, which was a few weeks ago, I kind of had the majority, if not all, of the content done. And one of the reasons I wanted to wait to announce that was to make sure I actually could see this through.
Right.
So the way it works right now, I release a new chapter every week or so. I'm working with a great editor who she's providing a lot of editorial-based feedback, kind of, more professional editing. So we're kind of in the editing stage where each chapter we're going through kind of, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Then the chapter gets released. I believe we're up to chapter 7 of about 12 or 13 chapters. Then, I get feedback during the week from the community. And then at the same time, I'm already kind of on finalizing the next chapter. So the chapters should all be out at least by the end of the year, looking at a 1 to 2 week schedule of releasing new chapters. And so that will be cool. And then I'm also really excited to announce that I've been approached by several publishers. So, I think one of your questions, or a lot of questions people ask, is what's available right now, and is it going to be in a more digestible format? I'm going to proactively.
Well, I was going to say,
yeah. So you're going to answer that.
Well, I can't answer it, no, but I was going to say the one thing that people might be a tiny bit frustrated by right now is it's not necessarily the easiest thing to navigate, but that I assume is because it's a work in progress, because you're still getting, input from the community. I'm also assuming, when this is done, Apple Books, EPUB, Kindle, physical, you're going to be looking at more finished product, I would assume.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is, as you mentioned, it's kind of a work in progress now. So users can go on, read that. The final plan is to have a free version online. As I mentioned, a big fan of giving back to the community, and because of the community involvement, I want it to be, free as a resource for that. So it'll be a website kind of where they're kind of as there is now. It'll probably be a little more user-friendly because it'll be the final product. I've actually already made PDF versions of each chapter available. That was kind of one of the feedback I got from users that, hey, great, we like the editable format, but I also want to just download it and read this.
Right.
Okay, cool. So now people can go to the website. There's a link right at the top, PDF, and you can kind of see each chapter. They mentioned talking to some publishers, so there's also going to be a physical book. I mean, I'm a big fan of physical books, something kind of neat to have on your bookshelf, carry around as a resource. And then obviously an ebook as well, likely through those publishers as well. And the goal is really to kind of have a professional product that people who like books or want that for their collection are able to acquire. And trying to figure out pricing something. I want to make it obviously very accessible. And then I'm also a big fan of kind of raising money for the conference we put on and some of the charity efforts as well. So, this is really not a profit venture. One of my friends always said, you don't make a lot of money writing books anyways, which is totally true. But I would really like it, again, to be, something that continually feeds back into the community. So, like I said, I would say stay tuned for an announcement about the physical published version. But in the meantime, it's going to be available online freely as well.
Right. Is this your first book?
This is.
Okay.
I actually love to write. I've written a lot of white papers for conferences. My blog posts sometimes get very long. Each year I write kind of like an overview of the Mac malware of the year. And at the end of last year, I was like, I should make I had a blog post. I was like, I should make a printable PDF version as well. And I did that and it came out to like 50 or 70 pages, like something rather obscene. So I was like, well, I write, this is 50 pages, right? Like this is on the way to becoming a book. And so that was kind of an eye-opening moment where I was like, I know I love to write. Writing a book was kind of this daunting goal. But that was really like, this is something I can do. And I remember there's a quote, I forget who it was, but, someone basically asked this novelist, how do you write all these books? And he said, 500 words a day. And I was like, I can commit to that. So at the beginning of the year, kind of committed to that. And here we are.
Well, that's very cool. And of course, still going. Do me a favor, if you would, remind people where they can find the book now so they can, keep up with it as it goes, plus, any announcements or stuff along the way.
Yeah, so you can go to TAOMM.org, which stands for The Art of Mac Malware. So if you go to TAOMM.org, Volume 1 analysis is currently available. All the released chapters, I believe we're up to chapter 7. So on this website, you can see the editable content if you want to provide feedbacks or comments. There's also links to each chapter as a PDF if you just want to download and read. And I do also want to take the opportunity to kind of thank a lot of the supporters who are also making this book a reality. So we mentioned the community. I would like to specifically mention my Patreon supporters who have also kind of provided a lot of feedback and financial support to make this book happen. And they're kind of neat as well because they actually get early access to the chapters, to the content. So if you're interested in supporting this community-driven resource, definitely check that out. And then there's a variety of companies, including SecureMac, who also provide really good financial support of this that makes this free book become a reality. So I do want to take I briefly wanted to take the opportunity to thank them. So yeah, pop over to the website, check it out. As I mentioned, Volume 1, which is a work in progress, but fairly far along. The content for that is available, and there will be more books. So
very cool.
Stay tuned.
And I want to tell people one more time, it is TAOMM.org if they want to start with the first one. Lots of really informative stuff there, and it's honestly just neat to see the thing grow. Patrick Wardle, thank you very much for coming on, for spitting knowledge, and for telling us about the book.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I always am super stoked to come on the podcast, talk nerdy. This was really awesome to talk. I'm very passionate about this book and really trying to get it out there to a large audience, both to get feedback, but just also to make this knowledge freely available. Because, as Mac attacks and Mac malware becomes ever more prevalent, we really need this army of knowledgeable Mac malware analysts so that we can make sure that the playing field remains level and we can really fight back against these threats and make sure that Mac users around the world stay secure.
You can keep up with Patrick a few ways. Follow him on Twitter at Patrick Wardle. That's WARDLE at Patrick Wardle to follow him on Twitter. I mentioned earlier that he's got a website, objectivec.com. He blogs a lot there about Mac security and also has a lot of tools, free and open source, for both end users and security people. Objective-SEE, objective-c.com. And if you want to read along with the Art of Mac Malware analysis, TAOMM.org is the place to point your browser. The Art of Mac Malware, TAOMM.org. If you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for this show, for the last show we did, for all the shows we've done, and you can listen along to every show right there as well. It all starts at one place, securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you would like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.